Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Civics. Today, we're going to continue talking about elections. In the last episode, we talked a little bit about the primaries and what those were and why they are important. And now today, we're going to talk more about like general elections, and we're talking about the big ones mostly, um, the presidential ones and the midterms. Um, so first off, we're going to start talking about the day that elections are, and that it's always the first Tuesday of November. And people get really um, kind of salty about that. It's like why are elections on a Tuesday in November? Well, here's why. Back when the country was first founded, um, they picked a Tuesday and they picked November for a couple reasons. First of all, the majority of Americans were farmers at that point, and so by November they weren't going to be working their fields anymore. So they would actually be free to go vote. They wouldn't have to stay in their farm. They could actually go to a polling place and vote. The other thing is that these polling places were often really far away. They'd have to travel for multiple days to get to their polling place. And so they picked a Tuesday because that gave them Monday to travel. Sunday, remember, America was super religious, so everybody was in church on Sunday. And then on Monday, they could actually travel, so on Tuesday, they could vote. That was the reason for they picked Tuesday. They wanted to make sure there was enough time for people to get to the polling place in time. Now, nowadays, right, this isn't necessary. Polling places are everywhere. It's, well, not always, but polling places are much easier to get to. Um, and so this is unfortunately kind of structured into our government, into our Constitution, this particular day. It's written in there, and so we can only change it if there's an amendment. So we're stuck with the first Tuesday of November. Okay. However, there are other ways that the United States could make this a more desirable day. We could make it a holiday. We could make it easier to vote on that day. But so far, we haven't done that. So that's something I wanted to cover first about these big elections. The next thing is that there are big elections like this every 2 years in the United States, right? There's the one where we select a president, which was this year, right? We selected Joe Biden to be our president in November. And then in 2 years, there's going to be what's called a midterm election. So it's going to be in the middle of Joe Biden's first term. And that's because every single member of the House has to be reelected, and 1/3 of the senators has to be reelected because they're every 6 years and they're staggered, so that only a third of them are reelected at a time. So those elections remake the composition of the House, and it's really a way to make sure that the people's will is heard even in the middle of a president's term. Um, so that's why that happens. Um, Now, the things that I think are really important to cover about elections are now, I guess, in this video. Wow, I'm structuring this super well. Great transitions, Mike. Um, these elections, these major elections, are increasingly becoming more and more and more money focused. This last election had literally trillions of dollars spent on advertisement, voter get out to vote sort of things, organizations, all of that, right? Lots and lots of money are in our elections right now. And that's due to Citizens United, that case we talked about when we were talking about Supreme Court cases, right? Corporations are now allowed to give as much money as they want, and they don't necessarily have to disclose how much money they're giving. So, and same thing with private citizens. So the people who are incredibly rich, or corporations who are incredibly rich, who have maybe differing interests than ordinary people like you and me, are able to have a disproportionate say in our politics. They get to decide what we get to think about, um, what we get to debate when it comes to candidates and when it comes to policies. And that's something that I think a lot of people disagree with. Um, Ordinary people like us, we have differing views than people who have billions and billions of dollars. Um, so that's something that's been really affecting American elections recently. The other major things that we need to talk about are things that are happening just in this recent last election. Well, not necessarily this last one, but it really happened in this election. Um, and one of them being voter intimidation. Um, so it's illegal to intimidate voters. You can't stand outside a polling place with a weapon and intimidate people. But there was a lot of calls by right-wing groups to do just that. Go to polls, intimidate people, shake them down, make people not feel safe voting. Um, that's something that's going to be increasingly more relevant as these hate groups continue to be prominent voices in our political system. So that's something that we're going to have to look closely at as the years go on. What's going to happen with that? Is President Biden going to do anything about these groups? And how is that going to be handled? The other thing is voter suppression. Now, voter suppression isn't supposed to be legal, but there are ways to legally suppress votes. And in several states, that kind of thing has been happening. Closing polling stations, voter ID laws, all these different things that make it more difficult for people to vote. People who are potentially poor, who can't afford to get an ID, people who or can't travel to a polling place that's far away. Voter ID laws disproportionately affect Black voters, and mostly these laws are targeting people who vote Democrat. And if you read any kind of study about voter suppression in the last 4 to 8 years, you would see that that's definitely the case. Most of the voter suppression laws are targeting people who traditionally vote Democrat. Why would this be happening? Well, because certain parties don't like to lose, right? And so if you can rig the system so it's in your favor, then that means you win more. Those sorts of things need to be addressed as well when it comes to our elections. And then finally, vote security. Our election system, although fantastic or whatever, right, is rather old. The computers and the systems and the hardware and the software that we use to run our elections on is pretty old. It's like 20 or 30 years old. And that kind of safety that we need, especially when there are foreign powers interesting in influencing our elections, needs to be updated and upgraded and more defensible. And so those sorts of things also need to be looked at when it comes to our elections. Finally, let's talk about the last major thing when it comes to our big elections like the president. Just yesterday, the Electoral College was conferred and voted on who the president was going to be. Okay. Now, that may seem confusing to you. Okay, we all voted in November. Why is there an Electoral College? Well, in our Constitution, it's written that the president is not elected directly. It is elected by the Electoral College. And basically, what that means is you vote in your state, and then the state awards electors to whoever gets the most votes in that state. It's a winner-take-all system. Okay, so that means I live in Wisconsin, right? Wisconsin voted for Biden the most. He won by like 30,000 votes or something like that. And so that means that all of 10 electors from Wisconsin get awarded to Biden. And so the Electoral College, they pick 10 people. Generally, the state picks these people, and they're supposed to be. A lot of times they're symbolic. So, like I know in New York, one of the New York electors was Hillary Clinton, right? Ha ha ha, touche, right? But oftentimes they're important people who who are in some way related to politics or the campaign or whatever, right? They're picked for a certain purpose, and they go to the state legislature house and they officially cast their electoral college ballot, and then that's all sent to DC, and then it's decided who the actual president is. Now, is that a very democratic system? No, it is not. Right? That is taking power directly away from the people. And there's been a big call in the last 8 years to eliminate the Electoral College, which once again would require an amendment. Why? Well, several presidents, right? That being George W. Bush in the first term and Donald Trump's presidency, right? They lost the popular vote, but they ended up winning the Electoral College. And so a lot of people find that very undemocratic. A lot of people want that to change. They want to have a direct election of the president. Once again, right, you need an amendment for that to happen. So I don't think it's going to be going away anytime soon, but it's something people are considering. The other thing that's potentially wrong with the Electoral College is that these electors can, technically they're not supposed to, but they can, if they want to, vote for whoever they want in the Electoral College. Those are called faithless electors. And that has happened before in history. That happened in, Oh no, that was in the House. Never mind. The point being is that sometimes the electors go there and they're supposed to vote for someone and they don't, right? And that's not a very fantastic system. Instead, we would like that choice in the hands of voters instead of in the hands of these special people who get to elect who the president is. So anyway, that's our video about kind of the main elections in our government, in our civic system. Next episode, we're going to talk about referendums and recalls and ballot initiatives and stuff like that, other things that happen in elections. And then we'll move on from there. So thank you so much for watching. See you next time.